Good evening, everybody. We might start the event now. We have a really stimulating conversation tonight about sustainability and the role of business in improving sustainability. Our keynote presenter tonight is Andrew Buay from Optus. Andrew is the Vice President and Group Corporate Sustainability at Singtel and Optus in Australia. I'd like now to welcome Andrew to the stage for his presentation.
Very good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I, too, would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and owners of the land and also pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. If you think of it from a First Nations perspective, when we talk about them being the custodians and stewardship of the land, I actually see them as the original sustainability professionals, right? Living with and off the land harmoniously for the last 60,000 years. That's sustainability. And as a leadership coach and mentor, I also look to them because, the First Nations, if you think of it, with no formal written language, have been able to transfer knowledge from generations to generations. That's mentorship. So I do want to acknowledge the elders, both past, present, and future. I've been with the company across the region for 33 years. Why 33 years? I've always seen the power of my sector, my industry, to really drive transformational changes. In the early years of my career, communications and how we build it was one of the key factors how Singapore became a regional hub for multinationals that facilitated a lot of economic development. When I was the chief operating officer in Philippines, which is a very low-income country, and this was in 2003, where the GDP at the time was about maybe US $350 per capita. People couldn't afford mobile phones. And we found that when we roll out our networks into regional and rural towns and villages, it transformed access to information, education, mobile commerce, mobile payments, employment, changed the economy. So the impact is actually very significant, and I've always felt this industry is so powerful. 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I used to run as a CIO and the technology group in Optus. I felt that as a business, we could actually do a lot more. What's the role of corporates in societal impact, even as, shareholders and value creation and so forth. But there's also the other side, which is what I call the unintended consequences. I also start to realize that as our industry became more pervasive, more penetrated, everyone became dependent. While it's good for the industry, there are also unintended consequences, as I call it. Every industry has a good side and a dark side. And in a sense, when we then think of the issue of sustainability, it's really about understanding the good side and the opportunities that we can create that have a betterment for society and the environment. But it's also about understanding what are these unintended consequences that we actually have responsibilities to address. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Environment, if I look at environment from a perspective, there's no doubt that telecommunications has been the force behind globalization of economies. It enables businesses to operate a lot more efficiently as we run their infrastructure, the ability to telecommute from home without the need to travel tens of kilometers of miles that reduce emissions. So it's a good side that this industry is an enabler of the reduction of emissions. But of course, if you look at the dark side of things, it's very energy intensive. In a place like in Australia, where energy is still 70% fossil fuels emissions. The development of the mobile phones that you all love and hold, some of them get traced back to conflict minerals with modern slavery, child labor. And for all the phones we love to change every 2-3 years, the thousands of tons of e-waste that we've got to deal with to recycle it, to refurbish it so it doesn't hit landfills. Those are the kind of issues we've got to tackle. And that's just environmental. Similarly, when you think of the social impact, fantastic social positive consequences. We bridge the digital divide. We give you information and access, productivity and efficiency, leveling the social disparity. The person in regional now, if they know how to tap communications, can be part of a virtual global workforce, where previously they wouldn't have been able to do that. Positive. But of course, on the other hand, unintended consequences. Social disconnection. People are so connected virtually that they are disconnected in real-life human interactions. Social media addiction, cyber safety, data privacy. So from a sustainability angle, and that was one of the reasons why I stepped out of previous roles to get into sustainability about, in 2013, was the opportunities and also responsibility to address the unintended consequences that can quite sometimes be forgotten amidst the growth of the business. The Optus sustainability strategy is really built around trying to address these issues and consequences across a diverse set of issues that are of concerns of our stakeholders. Diverse stakeholders, our customers, investors, regulators, non-profit organizations, our people, board members, suppliers, and so forth. And it's something we try to bring to life our company purpose, the power of optimism with options. And again, you see, we take a holistic approach across people, social, environmental. And one of the things we do is we set ourselves very audacious internal goals and targets, because what gets measured gets done. Goals that, in some regards, set in 20,000 for 2025. In some areas, we've already achieved some of those. So we said we hadn't stretched enough. And other goals like 100% of renewable energy by 2025 that actually we've been struggling the last year with all the Ukraine energy crisis that has just distorted the energy market significantly. As top executives, all our long-term incentives are tied 20% to our ESG targets. Why long-term incentive? Because many of the issues we're dealing with is not an overnight journey. You don't have quick results. You've got to build on things, whether in emissions reduction, social impact, and so forth. So I'll touch very briefly just on the climate, environmental, and then the social. From a climate perspective, again, we try and take a holistic view because sustainability is a systems issue that we believe we have to tackle on a holistic basis across the value chain to address a particular issue. So when we think of climate and the environment, we think in 4 dimensions. One, defend is really recognizing that for all the rhetoric of companies and global organizations working towards a 1.5 degrees increase by the end of the century, actually the science is really telling us we've long missed the target, which means as businesses, as governments, as society and organizations, we actually got to acknowledge we have to live and adapt in a world that's going to be hotter with more extreme weather patterns, which means like a telco, what are we doing to adapt our infrastructure to a scenario of more critical, drastic natural disasters? Decarbonization is really about emissions reduction, and I'll come to that. Dematerialize, and then how do we deliver value to our stakeholders? In 2015, we were one of the first companies in Australia to work with CSIRO to undertake a climate scenario analysis of the future of Australian climate mapped against all our infrastructure to try and identify where we're going to get more extreme flooding, bushfires, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100 type situations. And it was off the basis of that we started doing adaptation of our infrastructure. We would build cell sites with equipment room above ground on the monopole rather than on the ground because of floods. We developed a lot of what we call cows, not the cows animals, but satellite cell site on wheels, because however well you build, floods and fires would hit certain locations, the ability to turn up the network significantly and very fast can only be done by quick deployments. We even recognize that we can put up the network and customers still can't access. Why? The whole power grid would be down and no one would have a phone that's charged. So we create things like community trucks that after a disaster will go in and allow customers to charge their phones. So thinking of the whole end-to-end, how do we turn up communications, not only for the customers, but even for emergency services? And I'll share a story. One of the things that triggered me to really pay attention to this issue of climate, you might know Cyclone Yasin, 2012, I think. Very massive Queensland cyclone that created massive disaster. And I remember in 2012, I was listening into a customer calling. It was a recording of our customer calling in tears and desperate. She could not connect to her family members who were in the flood zone, had no idea. Were they alive? Were they dead? And it brought to home how important communications was. So when our networks and every network went down, disaster for community, am I in touch, what's happened to my loved ones, emergency services couldn't coordinate. And that really brought home the human scale of what we sometimes think is an environmental issue. It's about lives, it's about survivability, it's about connection, it's about family, it's about the ability to continue to keep community going. So adaptation is really very important. We have to assume we've got to live in a world that is going to be a lot more extreme. And of course, decarbonization is a major area, not easy. We are one of the few companies who have undertaken a complete footprinting of our Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions all the way into the suppliers and supply chain. It's an area we're still working very hard to try and procure more renewable energy, because that's one of the major ways to try and reduce our operational emissions, even though we're doing a lot of energy efficiency exercises and so forth. And of course, we've also got a lot of sustainability linked financing that is tied to our emissions reduction targets. Dematerialize, it's really about how do we use less resources, reuse resources, because even production has significant emissions. So examples of innovations by the business, working with our vendors, how do we strip away and make 95% of new modems recycled material? Why do we need a full SIM? How can we shrink half SIM? Encourage customers to eSIM so there's never a SIM, no packaging. That's all dematerialization. Dematerialization uses less resources, produces less waste, less resources in production means less emissions. One of the key issues we found is while we're engaging customers, everyone is interested to do something, but very few understand climate topic even if everyone talks about that. We created this product called Optus Eco, where through our mobile app is to educate customers on little actions that they can take, because it's all about behavioral change, to get them to act rather than just reflect on the rhetoric. Understand the emissions of your mobile phone usage, the charging, make decisions around, take a e-bill rather than a paper bill, take an eSIM rather than a plastic SIM. And if you want to, you can buy offsets that offsets your phone emissions and your usage emissions. Optus Eco. So the ability to educate as we also engage them into actions. On the community side, as an example of a big focus is digital enablement. I talk about a lot of the digital issues, the unintended consequences. And we try and take a bit of a holistic approach across the value chain of access. If I don't have access, I'm part of the digital divide. How do we create access? Then when people get access, then they now have a new problem, access to scammers, feasors, data privacy, loss of data, etc. And that's another area we try and tackle. And we think these two areas of creating safe, responsible access is going to be very important because we have an opportunity to tap the benefits of digitalization for things like e-health, digital education, digital everything to enable social empowerment. So across these three spaces, and we set targets aligned to the global goals. So if I talk about a simple thing like access, we all assume Australia is an over-penetrated market with broadband and mobile. But when COVID hit and kids were sent home and people were sent home, you suddenly realize, and we then hear it, the percentage of families who had no mobile or could not afford became a reality. And what we decide to do is work with our customers, because we also had customers say, what can we do? So we create Donate Your Data. It was an innovation of getting customers to donate unused data that technically they paid for, which otherwise the mentality is I paid for it, I'm just going to use it even if I don't need to use it. Donate it, Optus will match. It provides free mobile access to vulnerable families, domestic violence victims, and during the Ukraine war when there were a lot of asylum seekers or refugees, we provide free SIMs so that they can be connected. Customers who have donated regularly have a very high Net Promoter Score. There's value creation back from a loyalty perspective. Digital safety and online since 2013, as we recognize the issue of cyberbullying and social media addiction and mental health issues, we ran a program called Digital Thumbprint, which is one of the few corporate accredited e-safety commissioner programs that is allowed into schools to educate kids and teachers and parents on responsible and knowledge to be safe in the digital world. And just the past year, we've crossed over 500,000 beneficiaries in the program. It's got quite a lot of recognition for that. Innovation, digital enablement. Like I say, if we can get people with access and they know how to be safe and responsible, then we can really bring to bear the goodness of technology. And that's where we're working on the innovation side with tech startups, social impact programs. So I run a regional program across the Asia Pacific called Future Makers. We work with tech startups and social enterprises that are developing digital applications to solve for societal issues, mental health issues, domestic violence, elderly care in a virtual environment, e-health, examples like that, or in rural areas in Asia, remote mobile-based education. How do we create an open innovation ecosystem to stimulate digital and tech, not just for profit, but for purpose, and working in collaboration? And all this has been possible because we've not done it alone. We've not cooked up all these great ideas. One of the key things that I felt is very important is sustainability, which is about stakeholder engagement. So we work with all our group of different non-profit organizations, government, and even Department of Education. We listen to the issues, the problems they face, and we co-create and co-ideate on ideas and innovation. That's how things like digital thumbprint was enhanced and how Donate Your Data was created and so forth, co-created. And again, this process of stakeholder engagement and collective action has actually allowed us to evolve our sustainability. When I first took over in 2013, although I talked about sustainability, no one knew what sustainability was. They gave me the company's philanthropic portfolio. Every year we donate money to some charities. That was CSR, philanthropy. Then the first thing we did was how do we bring capabilities, skills, technology, value add in the programs, and that became more strategic CSR. Then 2 years later, in 2015, we did stakeholder engagement and take the lens of the stakeholders and respond to stakeholders with solutions, stakeholder materiality. And we went a step further and say, even while we're responding to the stakeholders, let's do it in a way that can create value back for the business, not necessarily monetary value, trust, partnerships. And that became shared value. Like I mentioned, Donate Your Data is a very high NPS. That's customer loyalty and stickiness. And more recently, as I shared in the example of digital enablement, a lot more innovation, the opportunity of innovation, the good side of innovation for social and environmental issues. And I suppose one of the key things as a person, a practitioner, authenticity is really important because you hear about greenwashing, you hear about greenwashing, all sorts of stuff. And I believe the goodness of corporate's got to be protected in the sense that if we are authentic, we do the right thing, we do it with the right intentions, then you can realize the goodness. You know, so for example, when we say, we've reduced our emissions by 50%, it's a great news, great outcome, beat our drums and all that, we shouldn't be beating our drums for the problem we first created, then we solve, and then we're taking credit for solving it. We've got to do more. And so the last thing I just want to leave us with is we talk about sustainability and ESG, environmental, social, and governance, as if they're separate topics. And I think it's very important that we recognize, again, there are systems issues that are very intricately linked. So when you have a natural disaster, the long tail of social issues, unemployment, disruption to local businesses, mental health issues, domestic violence, they follow a natural disaster if you look at the data. So you can't decouple environment from social. If we push harder, for example, into renewables, what about all the skill force of workers who have been trained in high emissions businesses? And we can't convert and upgrade their skills, and what becomes of them in this push to a low emissions renewable energy economy? Right? So government, corporates, organizations, universities, and so forth, we've got to be able to work together to address all these in a collective way, in a way that looks at how all the dots joins, so that we're addressing both social and environmental in a way that doesn't shoot yourself in the foot. When you solve one, you create another problem. And that's, I suppose, the complexity of sustainability as we're trying to look at it and address it. So with that, thank you very much. I hope that provides a perspective, and looking forward to a very esteemed panel to listen to their conversation. And thank you very much.